The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, casting long shadows across the polished hardwood floors. At the large mahogany desk, Michael Chen adjusted his wheelchair slightly, his fingers dancing across the keyboard as he reviewed the quarterly reports. 20 years ago, he'd started Innovatech Solutions in his garage with nothing but a dream and determination. Now, it was one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country. Taking a sip from his coffee mug, Michael paused to look at the photo on his desk, a younger version of himself standing proudly at the company's first office opening. Life had a way of throwing unexpected curves, he thought, remembering the rainy night 3 years ago that changed everything. He had been driving home from a late meeting, going over his mental checklist for the next day's presentation, when a truck ran a red light. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, but the spinal injury left him paralyzed from the waist down. Many expected him to step down, to let someone else take the reins while he focused on recovery. Instead, the accident lit a fire in him that burned brighter than ever. "Mr. Chen?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The board meeting starts in 10 minutes. "Thanks, Lisa," he replied, gathering his tablet. The quarterly board meetings were always virtual now. It was easier that way. Most of his employees in the satellite offices had never met him in person, knowing him only as a voice in video calls or a signature on company-wide emails. As he navigated his wheelchair toward the conference room, Michael scrolled through his emails. The Austin branch had opened 3 months ago, and the reports weren't quite what he'd hoped for. Something felt off about the culture there, but it was hard to put his finger on it through video calls and statistics alone. In the conference room, he positioned himself at the head of the table, adjusting his navy blue tie, his lucky one, the same tie he'd worn when he signed his first major contract. The familiar faces of his board members popped up on the screen one by one, exchanging pleasant greetings. "Before we begin," Michael announced, "I've made a decision. Next week, I'm going to visit our Austin office," unannounced. The board members exchanged glances. They knew his tendency to avoid in-person visits since the accident, preferring to manage remotely. But they also knew that look in his eyes, the one that said his mind was made up. "Are you sure?" asked Richard, his CFO of 15 years. "We could schedule something, make proper arrangements." Michael shook his head, a slight smile playing on his lips. "No arrangements, no special treatment. I want to see how things really run when they don't know the CEO is watching. Something's not adding up in their diversity metrics, and I need to see it for myself." He wheeled over to the window, looking out at the city skyline he'd helped shape. The accident hadn't just changed his physical abilities, it had opened his eyes to a world of prejudice and barriers he'd never fully understood before. Every ramp, every door, every sidewalk curb became a reminder of how the world wasn't built for everyone, and that included the corporate world. "You know," he continued, turning back to the screen, "when I started this company, I promised myself it would be different. That everyone would have a fair shot, regardless of who they were or what challenges they faced. I need to make sure we're keeping that promise in every office, not just at headquarters." The meeting continued with its usual agenda, but Michael's mind was already in Austin. He knew from experience that sometimes the most important insights came from the moments when people didn't think anyone was watching. What he didn't know was that his unannounced visit would spark a chain of events that would challenge everything his company stood for and prove just how much work there was still to do. As the meeting wrapped up, he looked at his calendar and marked next Tuesday for the visit. No special arrangements, no advance notice, no security detail. Just him, his wheelchair, and 20 years of business experience walking, or rather rolling, into his own company's lobby like any other visitor. Sometimes, he thought, the best way to lead was to first observe, even if that meant facing uncomfortable truths. Little did he know, that decision would become one of the most important moments in his company's history, though not for any of the reasons he expected. The Austin office of Innovatech Solutions gleamed in the Texas sun, its modern glass facade reflecting the clear blue sky. Inside, Rebecca Wilson was already having what she called a spectacular disaster of a morning. As the newly appointed HR manager, she'd spent the last hour dealing with a coffee machine explosion in the break room, 2 scheduling conflicts for important interviews, and an email server that seemed determined to test her patience. "I don't care if it's routine maintenance," she snapped into her phone, pacing behind her desk. "I need those candidate files before the afternoon meetings." She hung up with more force than necessary, running her hands through her perfectly styled hair. 6 weeks into this job, and she was still trying to prove she deserved the position over the internal candidates who'd been passed over. The Morning Sun caught her recently purchased designer watch, a little reward to herself for landing this job. Everything about Rebecca screamed polished professional, from her expensive blazer to her color-coordinated planner. Everything, that is, except her attitude. The knock on her office door made her jaw clench. "What now?" she called out, not bothering to hide her irritation. Tyler from reception poked his head in. "There's someone in the lobby asking about employment opportunities. I thought you might want to handle it, given the situation with the online portal being down." Rebecca grabbed her tablet, her heels clicking sharply against the floor as she made her way to the lobby. She had presentations to prepare, meetings to coordinate, and now she had to deal with walk-ins. This wasn't how modern hiring was supposed to work. The lobby was unusually busy for a Tuesday morning. A group of developers were huddled near the coffee station, while several account managers were giving a client tour. Rebecca's eyes scanned the space, landing on a man in a wheelchair near the reception desk. He wore a simple but well-made charcoal suit, though Rebecca barely registered this detail. Everything about her demeanor shifted, not into something more professional, but into something more condescending. The smile that spread across her face was the kind reserved for people she believed were wasting her time. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "I see you're interested in employment. However, we're a fast-paced tech company, and I'm not sure we have any suitable positions for someone with your situation." The man opened his mouth to speak, but Rebecca was on a roll. The morning's frustrations had found their target. Perhaps the building down the street would be more appropriate. They have a much simpler work environment. She emphasized simpler, as if speaking to a child. Several employees in the lobby had stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold with growing discomfort. Tyler at reception had gone pale, his hand frozen over a security badge he'd been about to grab. "If you just let me," the man started, his voice calm and measured. "Really, I'm trying to do you a favor," Rebecca interrupted, glancing at her watch. "Our environment requires peak performance and technical expertise. We have standards to maintain. I'm sure you understand." A developer in the corner actually gasped. The client group had stopped their tour entirely. But Rebecca, caught up in her own importance and prejudices, didn't notice the shift in the room's atmosphere. The man in the wheelchair sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. Years of boardroom negotiations had taught him to keep his emotions in check, though the slight tightening of his hands on his wheelchair's armrests betrayed his true feelings. The job posting, Rebecca continued, pulling up her tablet, was for a junior developer position. Obviously, that wouldn't be suitable. Maybe I could point you towards some data entry positions at other companies. The silence in the lobby had become deafening. The coffee machine's gentle hum seemed thunderous in comparison. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Texas sun continued to shine, oblivious to the drama unfolding inside. The man finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. "Actually, I'm not here about a job posting." He reached into his jacket pocket, and for the first time, Rebecca noticed the quality of his suit, the subtle but expensive watch on his wrist, and most importantly, the look of composed authority in his eyes. The next few moments would become legendary in company history. A story told and retold at office parties, new employee orientations, and diversity training sessions. But right now, it was simply a moment frozen in time. An HR manager who thought she held all the power, about to discover just how wrong she was. The lobby held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Even the usually busy phones at reception had fallen silent, as if the universe itself was pausing to witness this moment of reckoning. The air in the lobby seemed to grow thicker with each passing second. Michael Chen's hand remained steady as he held his business card, years of facing prejudice evident in his composed demeanor. He'd been in situations like this before, that are perhaps none quite so ironic. "Before we continue this conversation," he said quietly, "I'd like to confirm your name and position." His voice carried the kind of authority that comes not from volume, but from absolute certainty. Rebecca straightened her spine, still clutching her tablet like a shield. I'm Rebecca Wilson, head of human resources for the Austin office. She managed to make it sound like she was doing him a favor by sharing this information. And you are? Tyler at reception had started fidgeting with his tie, his eyes darting between Michael and Rebecca. He knew he should speak up, reveal who this man really was, but something in Michael's supple head shake kept him silent. A small crowd had gathered now, trying to look busy while obviously watching the scene unfold. The developers had abandoned all pretense of their coffee break discussion. The client tour group stood frozen, their guide mid-sentence about the company's innovative culture. "Tell me, Ms. Wilson," Michael continued, his voice remaining measured, "what exactly about my appearance led you to assume I was here for an entry-level position?" He gestured to his custom-tailored suit, his platinum watch barely visible under his cuff. Rebecca's confidence wavered for the first time. Something about his tone, the way he held himself, didn't match her preconceptions. But she was in too deep now, and pride made her double down. "Well, given your physical limitations," she gestured vaguely at his wheelchair, "I was trying to be realistic about suitable positions within our organization. As I mentioned, we have certain standards." "Standards," Michael repeated thoughtfully. Interesting choice of words. What standards exactly would those be? A young developer in the corner was recording everything on his phone, though he tried to be discreet about it. This moment felt important, historic even, though no one except Tyler knew exactly why yet. "Our technical positions require intense focus, quick responses, the ability to move between different project rooms quickly." Rebecca's voice trailed off as she noticed Michael's expression. It wasn't angry, wasn't even upset. Instead, he looked at her with something like curiosity, as if she were a particularly interesting puzzle he was trying to solve. "Ms. Wilson," he said, finally holding up his business card, "I want you to take a very careful look at this. Then I'd like you to explain to me how someone with my physical limitations managed to build this company from the ground up." The color drained from Rebecca's face as she read the card. Her tablet slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor in the silent lobby. The sound seemed to echo forever. "Michael Chen, founder and CEO, Innovate Tech Solutions. I don't," she stammered, all her previous confidence evaporating like morning dew in the Texas sun. 20 years ago," Michael continued, his voice now carrying across the lobby, "I started this company in my garage. 3 years ago, a car accident put me in this wheelchair. Neither event defined my abilities or my worth. But this moment right here, this defines exactly why I came to visit today." Someone in the back of the lobby started to clap, but Michael held up his hand. "No," he said firmly. "This isn't a moment for applause. This is a moment for reflection, for learning." He looked around the lobby, meeting the eyes of his employees. "All of you, please return to your work. Ms. Wilson, I believe we should continue this conversation in private." Rebecca stood rooted to the spot, her designer heels suddenly feeling less like a power statement and more like anchors holding her in place. Her carefully constructed world of assumptions and prejudices had just crumbled around her, and she had no idea what would rise from the ruins. The lobby slowly emptied, though everyone walked a little slower than usual, trying to catch every moment of this unprecedented scene. Tyler finally released his grip on the security badge he'd been holding, his knuckles white from the tension. As Michael wheeled himself toward the executive conference room, he paused briefly beside Rebecca. "Coming?" he asked quietly. It wasn't really a question. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the lobby floor. In those shadows, a story of prejudice, power, and personal growth was about to unfold, one that would change not just Rebecca's life, but the entire culture of Innovate Tech Solutions. The executive conference room felt smaller than its actual size as Rebecca followed Michael inside. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of downtown Austin, but neither of them was paying attention to the scenery. The door clicked shut behind them with a sound that felt unusually final. "Please, sit down," Michael said, positioning his wheelchair at the head of the table. His voice remained calm, but there was an undercurrent of something else. Not anger, exactly, but profound disappointment. Rebecca sank into the nearest chair, her legs no longer trustworthy supports. Her mind raced through possible excuses, explanations, anything to salvage this situation. But for the first time in her career, words failed her completely. Michael began, placing his business card on the polished conference table. I actually wasn't planning to reveal who I was today. I wanted to observe, to understand why our diversity metrics in this office were so different from our other locations. He paused, a slight smile crossing his face. I suppose you've answered that question rather thoroughly. Rebecca's hands twisted in her lap. Mr. Chen, I can explain. Can you? He leaned forward slightly. Because I'm genuinely curious what explanation you have for assuming that someone in a wheelchair couldn't possibly be qualified for anything beyond data entry. The air conditioning hummed softly in the background as Rebecca struggled to find words. Outside the conference room, employees were trying their best to look busy while stealing glances through the glass walls. The story of what had happened in the lobby was already spreading through the office like wildfire. I was just trying to be practical, she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Practical, Michael repeated the word thoughtfully. Let me tell you about practical. Practical is understanding that talent comes in all forms. Practical is recognizing that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a business advantage. Practical is knowing that the person you're dismissing might be your next brilliant engineer or innovative designer, or, he gestured to himself, your CEO. A notification pinged on Rebecca's phone, probably another email about those candidate files she'd been chasing earlier. The sound made her jump, and she quickly fumbled to silence it. How trivial those morning frustrations seemed now. Do you know why I started this company? Michael asked, not waiting for an answer. I wanted to create something different. A place where people would be judged solely on their abilities and potential, not their appearance or circumstances. He wheeled closer to the window, looking out at the city below. When I had my accident 3 years ago, many people assumed I'd step down. They thought a CEO in a wheelchair couldn't possibly lead a tech company effectively. Rebecca felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She didn't deserve the relief of crying right now. What you did in that lobby, Michael turned back to face her. That's exactly what I've been fighting against my entire career. And now I find it happening in my own company by someone whose job is specifically to build and nurture our workplace culture. The weight of his words hit Rebecca like a physical force. Her carefully constructed professional image, her pride in her position, her belief in her own superiority, it all crumbled under the simple truth of his statement. I imagine you're expecting me to fire you, Michael continued, his tone shifting slightly. It would be the easy thing to do. One quick decision, problem solved, message sent to the whole company. He watched as Rebecca's shoulders tensed, waiting for the axe to fall. Instead, Michael pulled out his phone and started typing something. But I've learned that easy solutions rarely create lasting change. So instead, I'm calling an all-hands meeting. In 1 hour, everyone in this office will gather in the main conference room. Rebecca's head snapped up. You want me to attend a meeting? After what just happened? Not just attend, Michael replied, finishing his message. I want you to sit in the front row and listen. Listen as I share my story, as I explain why diversity and inclusion aren't just HR buzzwords but fundamental business principles. And then, Ms. Wilson, you're going to have a choice to make. Outside the conference room, employees were already receiving the meeting notification on their phones. The usual afternoon buzz of the office was replaced by whispered conversations and speculative glances toward the conference room. A choice? Rebecca's voice trembled slightly. Yes, Michael said, his expression softening just a fraction. You can either pack up your desk and leave, no formal firing, just a quiet resignation, or you can choose to learn from this, to admit your mistakes publicly, and to become part of the solution. He wheeled toward the door, then stopped. The easy choice would be to leave, to find another job where you can pretend this never happened. But I suspect you didn't get to where you are by taking the easy path. He looked back at her. You have 1 hour to decide. Use it wisely. As Michael left the conference room, Rebecca remained seated, staring at his business card still lying on the table. In just a few hours, her entire world had been turned upside down. Now she had 60 minutes to decide not just her career fate, but the kind of person she wanted to be. The main conference room had never been so packed. Employees squeezed in shoulder to shoulder, some standing against the walls, others sitting cross-legged on the floor. The usual chatter that preceded company meetings was absent, replaced by a tense silence, broken only by the occasional whisper or shifting of chairs. Rebecca sat in the front row as instructed, her back straight, but her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap. The hour she'd spent alone in the executive conference room had felt like both an eternity and a split second. Now, watching her colleagues file in, she could feel their stares burning into her back. Tyler from reception had somehow ended up sitting next to her. He'd been kind enough to bring her a cup of water, though she hadn't touched it. The same developers who had witnessed the lobby incident were now crowded near the door, their phones thankfully tucked away. At exactly 2 p.m., Michael wheeled into the room. He navigated to the front with practiced ease, positioning himself where everyone could see him. No podium, no presentation slides, just a man ready to share his truth. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. "I'm Michael Chen, CEO and founder of Innovatech Solutions. Some of you may have seen me in the lobby earlier today. Others may be seeing me in person for the first time." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "What happened this morning has made it clear that we need to have an honest conversation." The air conditioning seemed to hum louder in the silence that followed. Someone coughed nervously. 20 years ago, I started this company with a dream." She turned to face her colleagues, tears now flowing freely. "I've spent my career telling myself I was protecting company standards, when really I was just protecting my own biases. I don't want to be that person anymore. If Mr. Chen is willing to give me the chance, I want to learn. I want to change. I want to make this right." Michael nodded slowly. "Change isn't easy. It's not comfortable. But it's necessary." He addressed the weeks following the lobby incident weren't easy. Rebecca's office, once her proud domain, now felt like a fishbowl. Every email she sent, every meeting she conducted, every decision she made was watched and quietly judged. Some employees were skeptical of her sudden transformation, while others waited to see if this change was genuine or just a show to save her job. 1 month into her new role, she sat in her office reviewing applications for a software developer position. Her door was open now, a small but significant change she'd implemented to make herself more approachable. A gentle knock made her look up. "Got a minute?" It was Tyler from reception, holding a stack of papers. "There's someone in the lobby I think you should meet." Rebecca felt her stomach tighten. The last lobby encounter was still fresh in everyone's mind. But she stood up, smoothed her skirt, a simple cotton one now, her designer suits hanging unused in her closet, and followed Tyler. In the lobby stood a young woman with thick glasses and a slight tremor in her hands. She was clutching a resume and looking nervous. Before Rebecca could speak, Tyler jumped in. "This is Dr. Chen, no relation to our CEO," he added with a small smile. "She's here about the developer position. She has a PhD in computer science and 3 years of experience at a major tech firm. She also has a neurological condition that causes tremors." The old Rebecca would have made quick assumptions. The new Rebecca took a deep breath and smiled warmly. "Dr. Chen, welcome to Innovatech. Would you like to discuss your experience over coffee?" Later that afternoon, Rebecca sat in Michael's office, sharing her decision to hire Dr. Chen. "Her technical skills are outstanding," she explained. "We'll need to make some minor accommodations for her condition, but her problem-solving abilities are exactly what we need for the project." Michael nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "And the tremors?" "We'll provide voice-to-text software and ergonomic equipment," Rebecca replied without hesitation. "The team is already excited about her ideas for improving our accessibility features." "You've come a long way in a month," Michael observed. Rebecca's eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk, the one from the company's early days. "I had a good teacher," she said quietly. "Several, actually." She thought back to the diversity training sessions she'd been leading. Instead of dry presentations about policies and procedures, she'd started each session by sharing her own story. Her prejudices, her humiliation, her journey to understanding. It wasn't easy to make herself vulnerable, to admit her mistakes in front of colleagues and new hires, but that raw honesty had sparked real conversations. "The training program is making a difference," she continued. "Yesterday, I overheard 2 developers discussing how to make their user interface more accessible for people with visual impairments." They weren't doing it because of company policy. They genuinely wanted to make their product better for everyone. Michael wheeled around his desk to face her directly. Change isn't just about following new rules, he said. It's about changing hearts and minds. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment, like what happened in the lobby, to open our eyes. But the real work happens in these small, daily decisions. Rebecca nodded, thinking about Dr. Chen's excited expression when they discussed potential innovations she could bring to the team. I used to think diversity was about checking boxes and meeting quotas, she admitted. Now I understand it's about recognizing that talent and ability come in all forms. A notification popped up on her phone, time for the afternoon's training session. As she stood to leave, Michael called after her. Rebecca, remember when I said the hardest lessons often make the best teachers? She turned back, nodding. You're proving me right. Walking to the training room, Rebecca passed the lobby where everything had changed. The space looked different now. They'd added a lower reception desk to accommodate wheelchair users, installed better lighting for visually impaired visitors, and created a quiet waiting area for those who might need it. But the biggest changes weren't physical. They were in the way people interacted, in the questions they asked, in the assumptions they didn't make anymore. As she set up for the training session, Rebecca noticed the room was already filling up, not with people who had to be there, but with employees who wanted to learn. Today, she began, looking at the eager faces before her, we're going to talk about invisible disabilities. She took a deep breath. But first, let me tell you a story about the day I learned that the biggest disability is a closed mind. The room fell silent, ready to learn. And as Rebecca shared her story once again, she realized that her greatest professional failure had become her most powerful teaching tool. Sometimes, she thought, rock bottom becomes the foundation for building something better. 1 year later, the Austin office of InnovateTech Solutions looked very different. The physical changes were obvious: adjustable desks, enhanced lighting, wider corridors, and a state-of-the-art accessibility lab where developers tested new products. But the real transformation went much deeper. Rebecca stood in the same lobby where her life had changed, watching as a group of new hires toured the office. Dr. Chen, now a senior developer, was leading the tour. Her hands still trembled as she gestured, but her voice was confident as she explained the company's commitment to inclusive design. When I first joined, she told the group, I was worried my condition would hold me back. Instead, it became an asset. My experience helped us redesign our whole user interface to be more accessible. Last month, we won an industry award for innovation in inclusive technology. Rebecca smiled, remembering how that project had started. It was Dr. Chen who'd first pointed out that making technology accessible wasn't just about compliance, it was about expanding their market and improving the product for everyone. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. Ready for the anniversary presentation? The main conference room was packed again, just like that day a year ago. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Excited chatter filled the air as employees from all departments gathered for the special company-wide video conference. Michael wheeled to the front of the room, looking around at the faces he now knew well. Some were familiar from that dramatic day, others had joined since, attracted by the company's growing reputation as a leader in inclusive workplace practices. 1 year ago, he began, something happened in our lobby that could have torn this office apart. Instead, it became the catalyst for transformation. He gestured to Rebecca. Would you like to share our results? Rebecca walked to the front, tablet in hand. Gone was the nervous woman of a year ago, replaced by someone who carried herself with quiet confidence. The numbers on the screen behind her told a powerful story. Employee satisfaction up 45%. Innovation metrics increased by 60%. Market share grown by 35%. Application rates from diverse candidates tripled, but it was the personal stories that meant the most. Last month, Rebecca shared, a young programmer told me he chose us over bigger tech companies because of our inclusive culture. A client switched their entire contract to us because our software worked better for their employees with disabilities. A competitor called to ask for advice on implementing similar programs. She clicked to the next slide, showing a photo of their new accessibility lab. But my proudest moment was when we stopped talking about accommodation and started talking about innovation. We're not just making adjustments anymore, we're creating better solutions for everyone. Michael wheeled forward again. A year ago, I made a choice to turn a painful incident into an opportunity for change. Rebecca made a choice to learn from her mistakes instead of running from them. And each of you made choices, every day, to be part of this transformation. He gestured to the video screens where employees from other offices were watching. Today, I'm proud to announce that the Austin office's inclusion program will become the standard across all Innovatech locations. Rebecca will be leading this expansion as our new Global Director of Inclusive Workplace Culture. The room erupted in applause. Tyler from reception whistled from his spot near the door. Dr. Chen beamed from the front row, her team of developers cheering beside her. But more than any title or program, Michael continued once the noise died down. What matters is that we've proven something important. When we open our minds, we open doors. When we challenge our assumptions, we discover possibilities. And when we focus on abilities instead of limitations, everyone wins. After the presentation, Rebecca found herself back in the lobby, looking out at the Texas sun setting behind the downtown skyline. A young man in a wheelchair was leaving after a job interview, chatting animatedly with his potential team leader about database architecture. Michael rolled up beside her. "Thinking about that day?" he asked. "Actually," Rebecca replied, "I'm thinking about tomorrow. We've got that new virtual reality project starting, and Dr. Chen's team has some amazing ideas for making it accessible to people with different abilities. Who knows? Maybe we'll revolutionize the whole industry." Michael smiled. "You know what the best part is? A year ago, you would have seen limitations. Now you see possibilities." "Well," Rebecca said, turning to head back to her office where a stack of resumes waited, each representing a unique perspective that could make their company stronger, "I had a really good teacher." As the evening settled over the Austin office, employees headed home, passing through the lobby that had become more than just an entrance. It was a symbol of how one moment of confrontation had sparked a movement of transformation. The story of what happened there was still told to every new hire, not as a cautionary tale, but as a promise. At Innovatech Solutions, everyone's ability to contribute was valued, and every mistake could become an opportunity to build something better. The next morning, as Rebecca prepared for another day of interviews and innovation meetings, she pinned her old business card to her bulletin board next to her new one. The titles were different, but the change they represented was about much more than words on a card. It was about the power of choosing to learn, to grow, and to see the world, and everyone in it, with new eyes.